There are two types of silence that soldiers learn. The first is the silence before contact. It is the breath held by a world about to explode. The silence that lives in the half-second between the last moment of ordinary life and the first moment of something that cannot be taken back. Every soldier who has spent time in the field knows this silence in their bones. They know it as they know their own heartbeat. Not by thinking about it, but suddenly and completely, felt in the emptiness behind the ribcage. The second is the silence that follows. It is the silence that descends on a scene where everything has happened and the world begins to take stock. This silence is different. It is heavier. It carries the weight of the consequences. Commander Maya Carter had experienced both kinds of silence countless times. She had learned to use the first as knowledge, the second as discipline. During 14 years of special operations with the Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, she had learned that the void between these two silences was where you discovered who you truly were when everything else disappeared. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, returning home from her mother's house, she did not expect to encounter either of these two silences. But the moment he saw the patrol cars, he recognized the first, and he had already sensed that he would experience such a moment. A lot was about to happen. Georgia Highway stretched along flatlands covered with pine trees, with the long, unhurried style of southern roads built before anyone thought of rushing. The afternoon light, at the low angle of late October, filtered through the trees, painting the asphalt gold and casting long shadows across the two lanes. Maya had traveled this road hundreds of times. From her mother's house in Millbrook to the city, pine trees, red clay edges, and the unique quiet of a region largely forgotten by the rest of the country. She was driving a black SUV she had bought 3 months earlier with money saved from 2 jobs. It was the nicest vehicle he owned. He had chosen it for practical reasons: the cargo space, ground clearance, and reliability ratings. But he also knew that under certain circumstances, it was the kind of vehicle that some people wouldn't like to see someone like him driving. Maya Carter was 38 years old. She was 1.75 meters tall, in flat shoes, and had the slim, well-toned physique of someone who had spent 14 years doing jobs that required her body to be completely reliable in conditions not designed for reliability. Her natural hair was cut short. She was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans and a military green t-shirt, because she was helping clean the back porch at her mother's house, and hadn't changed before leaving. Her service record, if anyone had thought to look at it in the next few minutes, it would have been classified at a higher level than the total security clearance levels of all law enforcement officers in this district. But no one thought to look. The moment he noticed everything changing in the last mile, he also noticed the patrol cars, all of them at once and completely. 2 patrol cars had been following him for the last 12 minutes, maintaining a special distance that was not a routine presence distance, but an intent distance, close enough to be seen, far enough to be denied. He had recorded them at the 4-mile mark, and had been running the 12 minutes, each set of variables calmly and without commitment to any particular outcome, simply following the truth. The truth was that he hadn't exceeded the speed limit. The truth was that there was no mechanical reason to stop him. The truth was that at the 2-mile mark, a third car had joined the 2 patrol cars, and all 3 were now moving with the synchronized determination of a coordinated action, not a routine patrol. Coordinated action with synchronized determination. He maintained his speed. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. He breathed steadily and thought about the variables. He couldn't make any move that might cause trouble. He knew very well that immediate action would be taken. It had always been that way. He had been treated badly in such matters in the past. After a while, the patrol cars sped up. The 2 cars behind veered outward at the same time, one to his left and the other behind him, forming a box behind him, while the car in front lunged forward and cut off his lane with a sharp diagonal move, leaving him with 2 options: stop or crash. He braked gently, his SUV hitting the gravel shoulder in a controlled manner, and this did not require any dramatic action because Maya Carter did not make dramatic moves when sensitivity was possible. He managed to stop without anyone getting hurt. She brought the vehicle to a stop. She placed both hands on the steering wheel. She kept her breathing steady. She made no aggressive movements. "Keep your hands where we can see them," ordered one of the officers. The voice came over a megaphone from the lead patrol car, parked diagonally across the road in front of a vehicle positioned more for maximum psychological impact than tactical efficiency. Maya noticed this. Deputy Sheriff Dale Walsh stepped out with an urgency that suggested the driver had decided how this stop would play out. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered and sunburned, with the distinctive confidence of a man who had served long enough in this county to have given up on waiting for results. His partner, Officer Carl Porter, approached the passenger side of Maya's SUV, hand on his belt, trying to look intimidating but mostly just looking hostile. His intent was clear, but Maya absolutely had to stay calm. The officers were looking for any excuse. A third officer was approaching from behind in the backup vehicle. Maya rolled down her window. It was enough to communicate. It wasn't enough to escalate the tension. This was a calculation she made in about a second. "Is there a problem, officers?" she said. Her voice was even and clear. Walsh's face darkened as he approached. "When a woman like you is driving something like that, there's usually a problem," he said. As he said this, he was looking at the SUV, not at her, with the deliberate manner of a man who wants to emphasize a point without stating it technically. "Get out of the vehicle," he ordered. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Maya asked. It should have been a perfectly normal question. "Did I ask you a question?" Walsh said, grabbing the door handle and pulling it open. "Get out, now," he ordered again. Maya stepped out slowly, her movements deliberately and carefully controlled, her hands always visible. Her 14 years of training had now transformed into a very particular kind of patience, the patience of someone who understood that in high-stress situations, the worst outcomes stemmed from acting too soon, and that the discipline of waiting for the right moment was not passivity but strategy. "Get back in the vehicle," Walsh said, placing his hand on her shoulder and pushing her forward. The force took her breath away and pushed her against the SUV's door panel, but she made no sound and remained calm. Knowing the officer's intentions, she had no intention of giving him the excuse he wanted. "That's not necessary," she said, her voice still calm. "I'm an officer. I have my credentials," Maya said. Porter's knee struck her ribs from the left side of her waist, cutting her off with a sharp, deliberate force that made it clear this was no accident. It was a message. They didn't want Maya to make a sound. They thought this would allow them to satisfy their egos as they pleased, but they didn't know they were dealing with the wrong person. When the truth came out, they would be in big trouble. "Shut up," Porter said. "People like you always have something to say," he sneered. The search that followed wasn't a search. It was a deliberate violation exercise, rough hands moving with deliberate force, but rather a complete display of force. Maya remained motionless throughout. She recorded every contact, every pressure point, every word spoken, and those who spoke them. She was creating a mental record with the same precision she used when gathering operational intelligence, because she understood that what was happening now would be important later, and that a clear and complete account of the present would be necessary then. In this process, combat training was not passive. He was constantly calculating positions, distances, force differences. The third officer was 4 feet behind his right shoulder. Porter was immediately to his left. Walsh stood in front of him, his back partially turned toward the road. He knew exactly what he could do, in what order, and what the outcome would be. He also knew that doing this without exhausting all other options was not discipline, it was impulse, and impulse caused people to die. Maya could have taken them all down right then and there if she wanted to, as her training dictated. But one of the first things they learned in training was never to intervene unless absolutely necessary. She had also learned how to handle situations like this. "Not so tough now," Walsh said, bending his left arm behind his back at an angle that sent a sharp pain through his shoulder joint. The angle was perfectly calculated for its cruelty. It was designed to inflict pain without leaving any immediate evidence. Maya recognized this technique. She had been trained to resist it and to resist the instinct to react to it. It was time to learn something about respect. The third officer moved to her left and snapped her fingers with the performative aggression of someone who had done this before with reliable results. It was unbelievable. It was a shocking moment. Then she felt the stun gun. The cold metal contact of the electrodes pressed against the side of her neck, just below her jaw. Walsh moved close enough that she could feel his breath on her ear. "Maybe this will help the lesson stick," he said. Maya said very quietly, "You really don't want to do this?" Walsh laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had no reason to take that sentence seriously even once. "Is that so? Watch and see," he said. He didn't realize he was in big trouble. He would regret it. The electric shock device rang. What happened in the next 22 seconds was later described by 3 separate witnesses as both the most controlled and the most explosive thing they had ever seen. The word that appeared independently in all 3 witnesses' statements was definite. The moment the electric shock gun fired, Maya sprang into action. These statements proved Maya was right. Maya had not intervened until the moment the shock device fired. Her right elbow was thrown back by the force of a weapon, and the blow to Walsh's solar plexus compressed his diaphragm and caused him to fall forward. As Walsh's weight shifted, Maya pivoted on her left foot and used the momentum of Walsh's fall to propel him forward. Walsh's own forward momentum carried him with enough force to dent the metal of the SUV's side panel and leave him gasping for breath on his hands and knees. Porter lunged from his left, reaching for his baton. Maya crouched halfway, shifted her weight to her right side, and swept his front leg with a controlled kick, throwing him off balance and knocking him flat with a hard, straight blow. The blow knocked the air out of the man's lungs and the baton out of his hand. The third officer, seeing his two colleagues knocked down in 4 seconds and his mind deciding to act before his brain could process what it saw, attacked from behind Maya's right shoulder with the determined desperation of a man. Instead of dodging the attack, Maya turned toward him, grabbed his outstretched arm, used her own momentum against him, and with a forceful thrust of her hips, threw him onto the hood of the nearest patrol car, leaving a significant dent in the metal. As a result, Maya seemed to have incapacitated all 3 police officers, albeit unintentionally. Under normal circumstances, she wasn't the type of person to do such things, but at some point she had to intervene. Walsh had managed to drop to one knee. His hand was reaching for his gun. Maya was already there. 2 strikes, precise and targeted, one to the wrist joint, the other to the side of the knee, stopping both the drawing of the gun and the attempt to stand up. Walsh fell back to the ground with a cry that was partly pain, partly something else, like the sound a man makes when a story about himself is completely revised. Porter was trying to get up. He had collapsed onto all 4s before his arms gave out. The third officer lay motionless on the hood of the patrol car, breathing but not moving, staring at the sky with the expression of someone undergoing a significant recalibration. It had taken 22 seconds. Maya stood upright. Her breathing was calm and steady, like that of someone who had been operating at about 40% capacity and found the situation physically unremarkable. She looked at the 3 men standing on the sidewalk and around her. Then she looked in both directions of the highway. A small crowd had gathered at the roadside, the kind of crowd seen on rural highways when an extraordinary event disrupts the ordinary. A few phones were raised in the air. Maya noticed this without reacting. The sound of sirens approaching from the direction of Millbrook began to be heard. Extra backup was coming. Only Maya had done this. Walsh, blood at the corner of his mouth, straightened himself up, leaning against the patrol car. The expression on his face had passed from shock and now turned into the peculiar, dangerous anger of a badge-wearing, humiliated man. And he had found the excuse he wanted. He thought he could easily arrest Maya for assault. Maya had managed to maintain all her control and composure up to this point. The situation had become quite chaotic. "You'll regret this," Walsh said. Maya looked at him with the expression she used when she heard something she didn't fully appreciate or find convincing. "No," she said quietly, watching the first support units appear around the bend in the road. "I won't be the one regretting it today," she replied. Maya spoke with great confidence. What she trusted was not her identity, but the evidence that provoked her. The sirens grew louder. Maya stood on the side of the Georgia highway, hands at her sides, in the same stance she had when she got out of the car. She wasn't running, she wasn't hiding, she had done nothing unnecessary or disproportionate, and every decision she had made in the last 22 seconds was backed by 14 years of rigorous professional training in the United States Army. What she didn't know yet was that Walsh, lying on the asphalt next to the patrol car, had already reached for his radio, and the words he would speak into that radio in the next 30 seconds would set in motion a process that would take much longer than 22 seconds to resolve. Maya's head would ache a little more. She would have to deal with a lot more. The backup units rounded the corner. Maya took regular breaths and waited. Lieutenant Ray Briggs arrived at the scene like men such as him always believed they would. Swiftly and noisily, he pulled the patrol car over, creating a shower of gravel that scattered the gathered witnesses from the roadside. The door opened before the vehicle had come to a complete stop. Briggs hadn't been this angry in a long time, because a call he had received on the radio had infuriated him. This meant something, because Ray Briggs worked at a level of anger that most people found alarming when they first encountered him, and his assistants had long since learned to skirt around him rather than deal with him directly. He was in his mid-50s, with the gravitas of someone who had once been physically imposing and had mellowed without completely surrendering that imposing presence. He had worked in this county's sheriff's department for 23 years, spending the last 9 as a lieutenant. He knew every road, every name, every unspoken agreement that made this region function. He was not the kind of man who expected to find 3 deputies lying on the ground when he arrived at the scene. He was troubled by the sight of all 3 men in this condition. He could not accept it. He surveyed the scene with the quick assessment of someone who judged events more by their consequences than by the facts. Walsh was kneeling beside the patrol car, blood in his mouth, holding his right wrist. Porter was lying on his back on the asphalt, still trying to catch his breath. The third assistant, a new officer named Stills, was leaning against the hood of the backup patrol car, looking like a man encountering a concept he had never encountered before. And in the middle of all this, Maya Carter stood completely motionless on the gravel, her hands at her sides, standing completely still at the edge of the gravel, without changing the posture she had when she got out of the vehicle. The situation looked a little strange, a woman and 3 male officers on the ground. It was a slightly comical sight. Briggs's face changed colors rapidly, then turned a dark blotchy red that indicated he had done something his doctor would not approve of. "For God's sake, what happened here?" he said, his voice carrying the distinctive quality of a man accustomed to being heard over long distances. Walsh stood up straight. "He attacked us, Lieutenant, for no reason. I was doing a routine check and he continued. "He was clearly lying. He did everything he could to justify himself. They pulled me out of my car for no reason." Maya's voice cut through Walsh's with the same sharp clarity that truth cuts through lies. She didn't raise her voice. There was no need. "They used force during an illegal search. Deputy Walsh tried to use a stun gun on my neck. I defended myself," she replied. Briggs focused all the attention he had learned to wield as a tool of pressure over 23 years on her. He closed the distance between them with deliberate steps, showing he was in no hurry. That haste would imply urgency, and urgency would imply the woman across from him deserved it. "You'll want to stop talking," he said, lowering his voice to the tone he used when he wanted to be clearly understood without sounding threatening. "I'll want to do the opposite," Maya said. "I'll want everything I just told you to be officially recorded." Briggs looked at her for a long time. He was reading her as he had learned to read people in his 23 years of county law enforcement, searching for clues that would indicate which category the problem he was facing fell into. Eyes that avoided his gaze, posture that shifted under pressure, a voice that began to tremble when authority was directly applied. He found none of these. Instead, he found something he had never encountered before, a person who wasn't afraid of him, didn't pretend to be fearless, but simply lacked access to that emotion. According to Briggs, Maya should have obeyed them unquestioningly. But one thing Briggs didn't know was Maya's true identity. For some reason, no one questioned her identity or sought the truth. Even when Maya tried to explain the situation, it meant nothing. This angered him even more than the scene he had come from. "Handcuff her," he told his assistants, who were arriving with backup vehicles behind him. "Resistance, assault on officers, obstruction. I'll add to the list on the way to the station," he said. He clearly wanted Maya arrested. 2 police officers approached Maya. Maya did not resist. She had not resisted at any stage. She put her hands behind her back and allowed herself to be handcuffed with the cooperative calm of someone who had decided that the next stage of this situation would not be won on the side of the road in October. Under normal circumstances, she could have incapacitated those officers if she wanted to. Her training was sufficient for that. But she didn't want the situation to escalate further. She wanted it resolved as soon as possible. As she walked toward one of the backup patrol cars, she turned her head slightly toward the crowd on the roadside. A few phones were still in the air. He looked at the crowd for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be clearly seen by every recording camera, then turned back around. He made sure every camera captured his face, because they were evidence. He began to plan inside the patrol car. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Department occupied a 2-story building on the county seat's main street, maintained with the peculiar institutional indifference of a building constructed in the 1970s and serving a population not expected to know much about its surroundings. The processing area was lit by fluorescent lights and smelled of industrial cleaning products and old coffee. Maya was brought in through a side entrance and processed with the mechanical efficiency of a system that had performed this function many times and long since ceased to consider it significant. She answered the desk clerk's questions with complete accuracy. Name, date of birth, address. She presented her military ID when requested. She watched his expression as he looked at the ID, watched the slight pause as he recorded the information before re-establishing his professional detachment. She was placed in an interview room, not a cell. An interview room, which meant someone had made a decision about how this would proceed. He sat down at the metal table, placed his hands flat on it, and thought about his next steps with the focused clarity of someone planning an operation. New questions kept piling up in his head. He had 3 urgent priorities. The first was legal representation. He needed someone who understood both criminal procedure and federal civil rights law, and he needed that person today. He had a name in mind. Rachel Kim, a civil rights attorney from Atlanta, had been recommended to him 2 years ago by a colleague, in a context Maya had hoped she would never need. He had saved her number. The second was documentation. Walsh, whatever Porter and Briggs's incident report said, the roadside witnesses had recorded it. Those recordings needed protecting before anyone with the ability and motivation to destroy them had a chance to try. He had seen the phones removed. Outside this building, he needed someone to start collecting those images immediately. Third was his mother. This was a fundamental priority, sidus and quiet and fundamental priority. Gloria Carter was 64 years old and lived alone in the house in Millbrook where Maya had grown up. She wasn't a woman who would easily be frightened, but she also wasn't a woman who had undergone 14 years of Delta Force training, and Briggs was a man who had been publicly humiliated by his daughter in front of witnesses and cameras on a county highway. Maya understood very well what kind of man Briggs was, which meant she fully understood what he was capable of when he felt his authority was being questioned in a way that demanded a response. Briggs was the kind of man who could do anything, and he could easily manipulate these events. Maya could handle that, but she didn't know how much her mother could take. She needed to reach her mother before Briggs did. The door opened. The deputy who entered was younger than the ones on the highway, perhaps 25 years old, and had the expression of someone who had been briefed on the situation and was trying to resolve his own uncertainty about it. "You can make a phone call," he said. Maya looked at him. "I need to make 2, she said. He thought about it for a moment. "1, the officer replied. Maya thought for exactly 2 seconds. "Then I need to make the most important one," she said, and called Rachel Kim. She chose the law over taking a big risk here. But her mother was never far from her mind. Rachel answered on the 3rd ring with the swift efficiency of someone who handled numerous important calls and had learned to respond to them instantly. Maya identified herself and recounted the last 90 minutes in detail. Every action, every police officer, every word spoken in her presence, the stun gun, the crowd on the side of the road, the phone records, the charges Briggs had laid out. She spoke for 4 minutes straight, without a single unnecessary word. When she finished, Rachel was silent for 2 seconds. Then she said, "I'm leaving Atlanta in 20 minutes. Don't tell anyone in that building anything else until I get there." "There's one more thing," Maya said. "My mother lives at 14417 Pinebrook Road in Millbrook. I need someone to check on her. Right away," before she continued. "I'll call you on the way," Rachel said. "I'm with you," she said, showing her support for Maya. Maya hung up the phone, looked at the wall, thought of her mother's face, kept her breathing steady, and didn't let the side of her that was just a girl, not the Delta Force commander, take over the side that needed to stay operational right now. She waited. Briggs didn't wait long. While his 2 assistants took Maya to the station, he returned to the highway scene, stopping at the gravel shoulder to look at the hood of the crushed patrol car, the skid marks on the asphalt, and the blood Walsh had left on the sidewalk, feeling the distinct palpable anger at the disruption of the order he had carefully maintained, now exposed for all to see. Witnesses were beginning to disperse, but not quickly enough. He could still see those who had pulled out their phones. He recognized 2 faces from the county, people who had lived here long enough to know better than to meddle in department affairs. He mentally noted both of them. He called his dispatcher. "Bring me everything you can find on Maya Carter, her military ID, current address, all known connections in the county." He paused for a moment. "And send someone to Pinebrook Road, number 4417, welfare check," he said. He was clearly going to try to check on Maya through her mother. The dispatcher, who had been with the department for 11 years, and had learned that in certain situations a welfare check meant something other than checking on someone's welfare, confirmed the address and ended the call. Everyone was aware that the intention was different. Briggs looked at the hood of the crushed patrol car for another moment. Then he looked at Walsh, who was sitting in the open door of his vehicle. Walsh's wrist was wrapped in a bandage from the first aid kit, and the expression on his face fluctuated between pain and a kind of seething anger that needed to be directed. "He'll say he was defending himself," Briggs said. Walsh looked up. "He will," he said. Briggs looked at him with the expression he used when his subordinates said things that were accurate but inadvisable. "Our report will reflect a different sequence of events," he said. Walsh was silent for a moment. He was smart, which, in Briggs's experience, could sometimes be problematic. "There were witnesses," he said. "Witnesses see what they are told they saw," said Briggs, with the confidence of a man who had tested this principle many times and believed it unconditionally. "Write the report. I'll review it before it's filed," he said. This was clearly an attempt to cover up the incident by suppressing evidence. Or, in other words, to pin all the problems with the events on Maya. They wanted to warn the witnesses around them. Of course they had the power to do so, using their position. He then got back into the patrol car and headed for the station. At the county line, he passed a car going in the opposite direction, a silver sedan with Atlanta plates moving quickly. He noted this but didn't think much of it because there was no reason to. The silver sedan was Rachel Kim's, and driving at the speed limit, placing her phone in the glove compartment, and speaking on speakerphone, dialing the second number she had told Maya she would call. Rachel arrived at the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department at 4:47 p.m. In her early 40s, she was a Korean American with a naturally pleasant face and a naturally contrarian mind, a combination she had found professionally very useful in her 18 years of civil rights practice. She carried a briefcase and wore a blazer jacket in the parking lot, because he had come from Atlanta wearing a different jacket and knew that the first 30 seconds of any corporate encounter was a kind of debate. He showed his ID at reception, presented his lawyer's card, and demanded immediate access to his client. The receptionist spoke to someone. That person spoke to someone else. Rachel waited at the reception desk with the patient, slightly increasing attention of someone memorizing everything she observed, which was true because that's what she was doing. At 5:02 p.m. she was taken to the meeting room. Maya lifted her head when the door opened. There was a change in her expression, the first change in the last 2 hours, a slight controlled release of something that had been held under constant pressure. She didn't look relieved as most people would, but she was relieved. It was good that Rachel was there. She was the only person with the knowledge and experience to get her out of there. Rachel sat down across from her. "Are you physically okay?" she asked. "My ribs are bruised," Maya said. "My shoulder joint is strained. Nothing requiring urgent medical attention," she replied. She had only one request, to get out of there as soon as possible and reach her mother. If her mother heard about this, she would be very upset. "Has something like this ever happened to you before? Has there ever been someone you tried to reach but couldn't?" "We'll have you examined before you leave this building," Rachel said. She opened her bag. "Tell me everything again, from the beginning. Every detail," she said, and began taking notes. She would make adjustments to the reports in the defense. She would also include them in the evidence files for the lawsuit she would file. Maya told her. With the same sensitivity. With the same conciseness. The same complete account took 4 minutes. Just like the first time. Because the account hadn't changed. Because the facts hadn't changed. Because Maya Carter's recollection of the events she had experienced had not been subject to the kind of distortion that affects people who have not been trained in observation and recall under pressure. Rachel listened, wrote, and didn't interrupt. When Maya finished, Rachel looked up from her notebook. "The witnesses on the highway. The recordings," she said. "Multiple phones," Maya confirmed. "I made eye contact with the crowd for about 2 seconds. Long enough to be clearly visible and recognizable in any recording," she replied. Rachel nodded slowly. "Smart." She paused for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Maya looked at her. "The call I made on the way here," Rachel said carefully, "to check on your mother. The room was very quiet." "Tell me," Maya said. "A sheriff's department vehicle arrived at your mother's address around 3:45, Rachel said. 2 sheriff's deputies. Your mother was taken into custody. The stated reason was an outstanding warrant for her arrest," she said. Maya looked at Rachel with an expression as if she had received information she had already half expected and hoped was wrong. The thing Maya feared most had happened. She was deeply saddened by what had happened to her most precious person. She could no longer stay calm. Her anger toward the officers had doubled. She definitely wanted them to be punished. After a while, "There's no warrant out for my mother," she said. "No," Rachel confirmed. "There isn't." She met Maya's gaze. This was Briggs's doing. The room was silent for a moment longer. "Then it's a hostage situation," Maya said. Her voice was perfectly even. The voice of someone who had changed their operational assessment of a situation and adjusted their plan accordingly. "He's using our mother to create leverage," she said. Everything was actually very clear. "Yes," said Rachel. Maya was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was in the tone she used when she assessed a situation and decided what needed to be done. "Then we need to move faster than he expects," she said. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Rachel opened a new page in her notebook. "Everything," she said. "From the very beginning. The recordings were posted online at 6:14 p.m. Not just one recording, 7 recordings. Uploaded to different platforms by different people who had stopped on that roadside in October, and with the instinctive clarity of people who had seen such things before, understood that what their phones had recorded needed to be somewhere the people in the recording couldn't easily access. The first share came from a woman named Diane Okafor, a middle school science teacher in Millbrook. Okafor was returning home from a parent-teacher conference when she saw police cars surrounding the black SUV on the highway. She pulled over immediately. She recorded for 4 minutes and 17 seconds before the confrontation escalated, and the footage began not with the fight but with Walsh opening the door and the metal creaking and his voice clearly audible from the roadside. This was very clear evidence. Moreover, this evidence would greatly strengthen Maya's hand. He published the article without a headline, no comments, no editor's comments, just the image and the timestamp. It was shared 600 times within the first 20 minutes. The second share came from retired postal worker Gerald Sims. Sims was closer than anyone else, and his phone had captured sounds missed in other recordings, especially the conversation immediately before the stun gun was fired. Walsh's words, Maya's silent response, and then the sound of the stun gun firing and everything that followed. This was now the second stage of the evidence. By 8 p.m. the 7 recordings had been shared a total of 43,000 times. By 9 p.m. the story had been picked up by 2 Atlanta news channels and a national online publication specializing in law enforcement accountability. By 10 p.m., Lieutenant Ray Briggs's name was in the headline of a news story read by 200,000 people. While this pleased Maya and proved her right, it also made Briggs uneasy, and he was very uncomfortable with the situation. Rachel Kim worked all night in a room she rented at the only motel in Millbrook with an available room. The motel wasn't great, but it had adequate lighting and a desk large enough to spread out her documents, which was all she needed. There were 2 colleagues from the Atlanta office, a legal assistant gathering records, and 3 legal notebooks filled by midnight. Rachel had filed an official protection request with the Sheriff's Department at 6 p.m. before the records went viral. Because Rachel had learned long ago that the order of protection requests and public interest mattered, and that filing a protection request first created a legal obligation, regardless of whether the department would fulfill it. The request covered all documents related to Maya's arrest, dashcam footage from all 3 police cars, all radio communications from the entire shift, all written reports submitted regarding the stop, all dispatch records containing the decision to pursue Maya's vehicle, and all communications between department personnel regarding the incident from the moment it occurred. In short, they had all the necessary information and documents in their possession. They had prepared everything in detail. At the same time, they also filed a complaint with the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. This complaint created a parallel record of evidence, which such applications always create, and which serves the same purpose. A second institutional body examined the same facts from a position outside the department's control. This was important for clarifying the incident. At 11 p.m., she called the FBI Atlanta field office. 18 months earlier, she had worked with Special Agent Sandra Cross on a case in another county where a similar pattern of civil rights violations had been observed, and she had seen Cross was the type of federal agent who moved quickly when evidence demanded it. This was the only type of federal agent Rachel found professionally useful. Cross answered on the second ring. Rachel spent 8 minutes summarizing what she had. Roadside stops, fabricated arrests, the wrongful arrest of Gloria Carter, the patterns of behavior the department was beginning to remove from public records, 4 complaints of excessive force against Walsh in the last 3 years, none of which resulted in disciplinary action. Cross listened without interruption. When Rachel finished, Cross said, "Send me the records tonight. I'll get a preliminary investigation warrant by morning." That was good. Rachel sent the files before hanging up. She returned to her notebooks and continued working. Rachel was released at 9 o'clock on bail arranged by Rachel through the district judge, following a call at 7:30 from a federal district judge in Atlanta where Rachel had worked as a secretary 20 years ago and who had taken her calls seriously for the past 2 decades. Maya was finally free, but the real fight was just beginning. She would do everything in her power to ensure those officers received the punishment they deserved, because they had touched Maya's most sacred thing, her mother. The charges were resisting arrest and assaulting a law enforcement officer 3 times. When the charges arrived, Rachel looked at them and placed them on the table in the motel room, with a peculiar calmness when she encountered something both excessive and exactly what she had expected. She went to the department to pick up Maya and didn't say anything important in the parking lot, because parking lots have ears, and Rachel was careful about where she said important things. She waited until they got in the car and closed the doors, then began to speak. "Your mother is still in custody," she said. "The arrest warrants show a different birth date and a different address for Gloria Carter. Still, they're applying these to your mother." Maya was even more upset. They thought that by holding her mother in custody on fabricated charges, they could control Maya too. But what they didn't know was that Maya was not someone who ever gave up. Knowing how much it would hurt her mother, she would make them pay dearly later. But she would do it within the law. Maya looked out the windshield. "How long can they hold her?" she asked. She was a little emotional, but she had to control herself. "Legally, they have to either press charges or release him within 72 hours, said Rachel. "But I don't plan on letting it get close to 72 hours, she said, and started the car. "I contacted the FBI. Cross is initiating a preliminary investigation. He'll want to talk to you tomorrow morning," she said. "Fine," said Maya. Rachel looked at her. "How are you?" she asked sincerely. Maya considered this question with the same seriousness she gave every question. "I'm on duty," she said. But inside, a storm was raging. She just wasn't letting anyone see it. Rachel almost smiled. "I thought so," she said. They pulled out of the parking lot and onto the county road. "There's something else you should know. The tapes were viewed 200,000 times an hour ago. The story's on 2 Atlanta channels and spreading nationwide. Tomorrow morning, Briggs is going to wake up to something much bigger than anything he's ever dealt with before," she said. Maya was silent for a moment. "He'll fight back," she said. "Guys like Briggs don't back down when they're cornered. They push harder." Maya was very good at analyzing people's characters. She knew what characters like Briggs were capable of when they got angry. "I know," said Rachel. "That's why we have to move faster than he can adapt," she replied. They drove silently through the October night, Georgia pines, standing in the darkness on either side of the road, the highway empty and stretching out in the headlights. Maya looked at the passing trees and thought of her mother sitting in a holding cell somewhere in the building they had just left. She had raised a Delta Force commander alone in this region, a woman who was not easily intimidated, but also 64 years old, and a woman who had done nothing to deserve being used as a pawn by a frightened lieutenant. "I need to reach her," Maya said. "I know," Rachel said. "We'll go tomorrow morning." Special Agent Sandra Cross arrived in Millbrook at 7:45 a.m. in a dark-colored sedan with federal government license plates. Between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. she reviewed 7 videos, 112 pages of county records, and 3 years of complaint documents, arriving at a series of confident conclusions. She was in her early 50s, with cropped silver hair and a face that was both easy to underestimate and very hard to deceive. She had spent 26 years in the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and during that time he had developed a particular sensitivity to the difference between isolated misconduct and systematic patterns of behavior, the difference between a bad officer and a department that had built structures to protect bad officers from consequences. This distinction mattered because it determined what needed to be done and who should be held accountable for doing it. What he found in the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department records that night was not an isolated instance of misconduct. He met Rachel and Maya at the motel at 8 in the morning. Rachel had brought coffee from the gas station across the street. It was the best option available in Millbrook at 8 in the morning, and Cross accepted a cup with the pragmatism of someone who had worked in field offices under worse conditions than a motel in Cross, Georgia. Maya gave her statement for the third time, with the same sensitivity, the same completeness, the same conciseness. Cross listened with the attentiveness he had observed in Rachel's previous work, the attentiveness of someone who not only takes in information, but constructs a structure from the information given. When Maya finished, Cross set down his coffee. "I reviewed the records," he said, "all 7 of them. I also reviewed Walsh's prior complaint history, Porter's service record, and Briggs's administrative record, to the extent my time allowed." He paused. "This isn't the first time. Walsh received 4 complaints of excessive force within 3 years. None were upheld. 2 of the complainants were black residents of this county. 1 complaint was withdrawn after the complainant's brother was arrested on charges that were later dismissed. The other was dismissed at the departmental level without investigation." He looked at Maya. "Briggs personally reviewed and dismissed all 4 complaints," he said. The situation was very clear. Briggs closed these types of cases immediately. No one asked him why he did it. Maya stared at him intently. "And my mother," she said. "The arrest warrants mentioned are not valid for your mother," Cross said. "The inconsistencies in birth date and address are documented in the records. This was not an oversight. Someone made a decision. I believe that decision was made by Briggs and was made 40 minutes after your arrest. I believe it was both coercive and punitive," he said. He understood perfectly well that this was a clear move against Maya. "How would you react if they used your mother against you like this? Could you remain calm? Can you get him out of here?" Maya asked. "I'm going to the department this morning," Cross said. "I'll present the inconsistencies in the search warrant documents and demand his immediate release under federal supervision. If they resist, I have the authority to apply for a federal court order by noon." Rachel placed her coffee on the table. "What's the timeline for a broader investigation?" she asked. "It depends on what I found this morning," Cross said. "But I'll tell you what I told my supervisor last night. What I saw in the records shows that this department has consistently acted for racist reasons and has actively suppressed complaints on this issue for at least 3 years. If what I found this morning is consistent with what I reviewed last night, I will recommend opening a full federal civil rights investigation." He looked at Maya. "And I want your testimony to be central to that investigation," he said. Maya had no problem with that. She wanted to do whatever she could. She just wanted the guilty to be punished. Maya looked at him with the direct, appraising attention she gave to anyone she decided to trust on an important matter. Cross met her gaze without flinching. "It will happen," Maya said. Rachel filed a civil complaint at 10 a.m., while Cross was at the sheriff's department. 67 pages. 4 causes of action: unlawful seizure, excessive use of force, unlawful arrest, civil rights violations under federal law, Section 1983 and Title VI. Walsh, Porter, Briggs, and the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department, as an institution, were named as defendants. Everything was crystal clear. Rachel had spent most of the night preparing the preliminary injunction section. This section demanded that Walsh and Porter be immediately suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. It demanded that all incidents of force within the department over the past 3 years be independently reviewed. This would allow some previously closed or overlooked case files to be reopened. Finally, it requested that a federal monitor with reporting obligations to the court be appointed to oversee the implementation of the resulting reforms. It also requested a formal review of the department's complaint handling process, specifically its process of investigating and dismissing Briggs's 4 complaints of excessive force against Walsh based on a single finding. He submitted this to the federal district court and simultaneously sent copies to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, the Georgia Attorney General's Office, and the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. By 11 a.m., this petition was reported by all media outlets that had originally published the story, as well as several that had not. By noon, the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department public relations line had stopped taking calls. Cross emerged from the Sheriff's Department at 11:30 a.m. with Gloria Carter. Gloria was 64 years old, with hair cut short like her daughter's, and the same calm, unhurried attention in her eyes. She had spent 17 hours in a holding cell on an arrest warrant that was not hers, and she had spent those 17 hours with the special, measured patience of a woman who had managed to raise a child alone and survive in such a county without wasting her energy on things she couldn't change. She saw Maya waiting on the sidewalk outside the department and walked toward her with the determined, heavy steps of someone who wouldn't run, not because she wasn't relieved, but because running would seem like she was scared. Gloria Carter had decided long ago not to satisfy her fear by showing it in this building. They embraced for a moment on the sidewalk outside the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. Neither spoke. The morning was bright and cold, and the October sky above the county seat was a deep, clear blue, utterly unrelated to what was happening in the building behind them. When they parted, Gloria looked intently at her daughter's face, with the careful scrutiny of a mother examining every detail. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "My ribs are bruised," Maya said. "Nothing serious." Gloria nodded once. She looked at Cross, who stood at a respectful distance. Then she looked at Rachel, who had arrived at the courthouse in time to see them leave. She turned back to Maya. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Everything," Maya told her. Gloria listened, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression the same one Maya always saw on her mother's face when she was processing difficult information and deciding what to do next. When Maya finished, Gloria was silent for a moment. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "A statement," said Rachel, stepping forward. "Everything that happened from the moment the police came to your door." Gloria looked at her. "I remember every word," she said. "Good," said Rachel. "I'll need all of it." The 4 of them walked together toward Rachel's car, down Millbrook County's main street on a bright October morning, moving away from the building behind them with the quiet, determined momentum of something set in motion and unstoppable. Briggs was in that building. He watched from the window. The previous afternoon, for the first time, he had begun to realize he was facing a situation with dimensions he hadn't accounted for when making his decisions at the highway side and dispatch center. He hadn't finished his work yet. He still had resources he hadn't used, people he hadn't called, and arrangements he still believed were valid. He would soon learn how wrong he was about the last part. The news broke nationwide at 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning, not because a single news outlet had decided it was ready. 31 news outlets had decided they could no longer justify waiting. The 7 roadside recordings were viewed a total of 4 million times overnight, an effect that exerted a certain pull on editorial decisions, the kind of effect that makes discussions about newsworthiness very short and the results very quick. The headline that appeared most consistently in the news was the headline, in various formulations, different versions of the same sentence. Delta Force Commander attacked during traffic control. The word attack appeared in 23 of the 31 headlines. 4 headlines used the phrase was attacked. 2 headlines used the phrase was targeted. Only one news source used the word defended, which was the most accurate word, but also the least used, and this news source's version was shared much more than the others, which was a difference that showed what people were hungry for. The recording on Gerald Sims' phone, which captured Walsh's words, Maya's response, and the sound of the stun gun firing, became the most widely circulated clip. This clip, compressed into 42 seconds, was shared without comment, because 42 seconds didn't require commentary. You heard Walsh's voice? You heard the electroshock device. You heard the silence that followed. Then you saw 3 sheriff's deputies lying on the ground, and a woman in the middle, breathing steadily with her hands at her sides, and the image did what images do when they tell a complete story without needing explanation. By 8 o'clock, the Defense Department's Public Affairs Office had received 47 media inquiries about Commander Maya Carter. By 9 o'clock, the Millbrook County Sheriff had received calls from the Governor's Office, the State Attorney General, and 2 members of the state legislature. By 10 o'clock, Lieutenant Ray Briggs had stopped answering his phone. Maya learned the national news at 7:15 in the motel parking lot where Rachel had set up a sort of field headquarters 2 hours after Gloria's release. Rachel's bag was open on the hood of the rental car. 3 phones were being used in rotation, and legal ledgers were piling up at a rate that showed she wasn't sleeping and had no intention of doing so. Maya stood beside her mother and read the headlines on Rachel's phone screen with the particular and measured attention she gave to information about the ongoing operation. The news didn't surprise her. She had noticed the phones by the roadside. She understood what to do when they reached those platforms. What she couldn't quite predict was the speed. The Defense Department's inquiries will require a response, Maya said. I spoke with a JAG officer this morning, said Rachel, without looking up from the document she was examining. The command is aware of the situation. They are preparing a statement confirming the service record and current status. She paused for a moment. They are very careful with their language, careful in a good way. Gloria sat on the hood of the car, coffee from the gas station across the street in her hand, watching Rachel work. She had spent the last 17 hours in a holding cell and emerged not weakened by the experience, but with an even sharper expression. She looked at Maya. It's going to get worse before it gets better, she said. It was not a question. Yes, said Maya. Briggs will try something else. Yes. Gloria nodded and drank her coffee. She had raised this woman alone in this county and taught her that truth, properly documented and insistently presented, was more resilient than any arrangement built upon its suppression. She watched her daughter work and saw evidence of this teaching in every measured, precise step Maya took. It inspired a feeling in her that was similar to pride, but much more complex, something she couldn't put into words. Cross arrived at 7:40 with the focused determination that Maya recognized as his default working style. Cross had learned that it was tactically advantageous to arrive before the institution's defense systems were fully activated, so he had gone to the sheriff's office at 6 in the morning, before work hours. Because he had learned that it was tactically advantageous to arrive before the institution's defense systems were fully engaged. Tell me, Maya said. Cross placed his bag next to Rachel's. Walsh and Porter hired lawyers through the police union. Both refused to make statements. Briggs met with the district attorney at 6:30 a.m. and left the meeting at 7 a.m. with an expression as if he had heard something he didn't want to hear. He paused for a moment. The district attorney is James Whitfield. He's been district attorney for 11 years. Also, according to information I found in the department's financial records last night, he's a person whose name appears 4 times in connection with the resolution of complaints against this department. Structured settlements to prevent public disclosure. He looked at Rachel. I'd like to hear your opinion on this. Rachel looked up from her notebook. Depending on his role in arranging these settlements, he could potentially be a defendant. That means the advice he gave Briggs this morning came from a man with his own liability issues, meaning that advice may not be entirely in Briggs' best interests. That's my opinion too, said Cross. Maya listened attentively, piecing together the flood of information to form a complete picture. What will Briggs's next move be? She asked. Cross and Rachel looked at each other. He has 2 options, said Cross. He can cooperate and hope that cooperation reduces his risk. Or he could increase the pressure on you and hope the situation becomes complicated enough that federal authorities lose interest. He paused. Based on what I know about him so far, I think he'll increase the pressure. He will increase the pressure, Maya confirmed. He's been running this county unsuccessfully for 9 years. He has no instinct for cooperation. He has an instinct for domination. She looked at Cross. What does increasing the pressure mean? Additional charges against you, pressure on witnesses. Probably an attempt to suppress the records by going to court, claiming they were obtained illegally. Cross's expression showed what he thought about the likelihood of the latter option. None of this will work right now, but he doesn't know that yet. Maya slowly shook her head. Then we need to be 3 steps ahead of every increase in pressure. We've been doing just that since last night, Rachel said, and for the first time since the previous afternoon, her statement conveyed satisfaction rather than urgency. She lifted one of the notebooks. The first step has already been taken. The step Rachel was referring to was the network of witnesses she had been setting up since 9 o'clock the previous night. 7 recordings meant 7 recording devices, and 7 recording devices meant 7 people who for some reason were stopped on that roadside, lived in or were passing through Millbrook County and understood clearly enough to document what they saw. By 11 p.m. Rachel had found 5 of the 7 people. By 6 a.m. she had found all 7. Each conversation proceeded the same way. She introduced herself, explained the legal situation, and asked 2 questions. The first was whether they would be willing to make a formal witness statement. The second was whether they knew anyone else who had been treated similarly by this department. The answer to the first question was yes in 6 of the 7 cases. The answer to the second question was what changed the shape of the structure Rachel had built. A woman named Patricia Denvers had been stopped by Walsh on the same highway 18 months earlier. Walsh noted in his report that she was driving a vehicle that did not match her profile. This was a special language used by a man who had been coding his reports with this phrase for a long time. The stop had lasted 40 minutes. Walsh had searched the woman's car without permission and without cause. Patricia had filed a complaint with the department. Briggs had dismissed the complaint within 3 days without a documented review. Diane's brother, a man named James Okafor, had been ticketed by Porter for a traffic violation, but traffic camera footage later showed that the violation had not occurred. James had contested the ticket. The ticket was withdrawn. 3 weeks later, in the parking lot of his workplace, was ticketed every day for 2 weeks by officers who had never issued a ticket before and never issued one since. August Coleman, a retired teacher, witnessed a black teenager being stopped on a county road 8 months ago and tried to report it to the department. She was told the report was unnecessary. When she insisted, a police officer came to her home and explained, in terms that were clear enough to understand but vague enough to be denied, that the department appreciated community members who understood when civilian involvement was appropriate. Rachel had obtained official statements from all three by 7 in the morning. She added these to the civilian complaint as evidence of a pattern. Then she called Cross and read him the 3 summaries. Cross listened and said, "These are the model documents I need. Send me the full statements." Rachel sent the statements while the phone call was still ongoing. At 11 a.m., Cross entered the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department for the second time that day. This time, he was not alone. He was accompanied by 2 federal agents and had a federal protective order, signed that morning by a district judge, covering all documents in the department's possession relating to the use of force incidents, complaint filings, and the resolution of complaints over the previous 4 years. The order was specific and comprehensive, prepared with the assistance of a Justice Department attorney who had been on the phone with Cross since 6 a.m. and was aware of the urgency. The department's officer on duty, a man named Fletcher who had worked in the department for 7 years and functionally understood the difference between situations that could be managed internally and those that had gone beyond that possibility, looked at the federal protection order, then at the 3 federal agents, then back at the order, and made the kind of decision people in his position make when the math is clear. He cooperated fully. The evidence team spent 4 hours in the department's records room. They viewed every hard drive. They copied every file. They photographed every physical document. They retrieved dashcam footage from every patrol car found on the highway the previous afternoon. What was seen in the dashcam footage was consistent with what was shown to the world in 7 recordings taken from 7 different angles. It showed Walsh opening Maya's door. It showed Porter's knee hitting Maya's ribs. It showed the tasser was visible. It showed what happened next for 22 seconds. And then it showed Briggs coming over, examining his fallen partner on the ground, and turning toward Maya with his baton in hand. The dashcam footage also included audio. The audio recording included 11 seconds that the roadside recordings missed, as most of the backup patrol cars blocked the view of witnesses. Those 11 seconds, the 11 seconds during which Briggs said things to Maya that were clearly audible and clearly documented, and the 11 seconds that Cross listened to twice in the recording room, during which his statement became very calm and very focused, because he was no longer assessing the situation. He had completed his assessment, and he had moved on to the next stage. At 3:15 p.m., he called the Justice Department attorney. "I have enough evidence to open a full investigation," he said. "I need authorization for wiretaps and financial investigation." The Justice Department attorney said, "Send me the dashcam audio recording." Cross sent it. The authorization arrived within 40 minutes. Briggs took action at 2 p.m. He filed amended charges against Maya with the district attorney's office, adding charges of aggravated assault against a law enforcement officer and obstruction of justice. At the same time, he requested that the district attorney's office declare the 7 roadside recordings inadmissible in any county case on the grounds that they had been released to the public before being properly preserved through legal channels. The motion regarding the recordings was filed at 2:15 p.m. and was denied by the federal district judge at 3:40 p.m. on the grounds that federal preservation orders supersede county admissibility motions and that evidence related to a federal civil rights investigation is not subject to suppression through local court motions. The amended charges against Maya were a more complex issue. These charges had been filed through legitimate procedural channels, and Rachel could not simply dismiss them. What she could do and did immediately was file a motion questioning the factual basis of each charge, citing 7 records, the dashcam footage that Cross had now officially placed under federal evidence preservation, and 3 witness statements documenting the pattern of behavior that constituted the context of the specific incident. She submitted the motion at 4 p.m. and sent a copy to Cross. Cross sent a copy to the Justice Department attorney. The attorney sent a copy to the federal judge in Atlanta, who had been briefed on the case that morning and scheduled a hearing for 9 a.m. the following day. Rachel called Maya at 4:30 to inform her about the hearing. Maya was in the motel room with her mother. Gloria had spent the afternoon writing her statement at the small table by the window. She had written it in the meticulous, orderly handwriting of a retired educator who believed that handwriting reflected a quality of attention that typed documents could not convey. She had filled 11 pages. "Tomorrow morning at 9, Rachel said. "Federal court in Atlanta. I need you to be there." "I'll be there," Maya said. She looked up at her mother, who had been reading her statement. "Tomorrow morning in Atlanta," Maya said. Gloria put down her pen and looked at her daughter with the expression she had been using for a while, about to say something she had been thinking. "You know what this is," she said. "This isn't just Briggs anymore. This is something bigger than Briggs." "Yes," Maya said. "And you won't stop at Briggs." "No," Maya said. Gloria picked up her pen again. "Then you'd better be sure everything is right," she said. "Because when you attack a system, the system fights back, and everything has to be right." Maya looked at her mother, 64 years old, 11 pages. 17 hours of unjust detention documented in meticulous, careful handwriting. Sitting at a table in a motel in Millbrook County, she was helping to dismantle the structure that had put her there. "Everything is right," Maya said. Gloria nodded and continued writing. Through the motel window, the October afternoon was bright and cold. Georgia pines stood tall and still on either side of the county road, and the sky was a deep, clear blue, utterly indifferent to what was happening below. At 5 o'clock, Cross called Rachel to report the results of the preliminary financial review. The examination of the department's financial records during the 4-hour authorized access period revealed a pattern of payments that were not legitimate accounting entries, settlements structured through the county attorney's office, funds transferred through 3 separate accounts with unclear origins and destinations, payments timed to coincide with the withdrawal of 2 specific complaints against Walsh, one of which was a complaint by a woman whose brother was later arrested. Cross summed it up in 2 sentences. "This is not a department that protects bad officers," he said. "This is a department that operates like a badge-wearing crime syndicate. Briggs isn't just responsible for civil rights violations, he's also facing federal corruption charges." Rachel was silent for a second. "How long will it take to build a strong enough case for an arrest?" "Depends on how fast we find things," Cross said. "Less than the time left for him to make more mistakes." He didn't have to wait long. Briggs made his final mistake at 9 o'clock on Thursday. Not dramatically. Not like a man who consciously decides to do something he knows will end in disaster. Like a man who has worked so long within a system he built himself. A man who has lost the ability to accurately assess what that system can and cannot protect him from. A man who had confused the absence of consequences with the presence of invulnerability, and who, when that difference suddenly emerged with the approval of federal authorities, experienced a particular kind of blindness. At 8:47 a.m. he called the county prosecutor. The call lasted 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, Briggs said 8 things that were recorded with complete clarity by an authorized listening device, and Cross listened to them in real time from a sedan parked 2 blocks away from the sheriff's department. His statement said 8 things that were recorded perfectly clearly by the authorized listening device, and Cross listened in real time from a sedan parked 2 blocks away from the sheriff's department, and his statement reflected his statement as he finished an assessment he had largely completed. At 9:02 a.m. he called the Justice Department attorney. "I have it," he said. "Is it on record?" the DOJ attorney asked. "The 11-minute portion," Cross replied. The DOJ attorney was silent for exactly 3 seconds. "I'll get the arrest warrant to you within an hour." Cross hung up the phone, looked at the building 2 blocks away, and contemplated the 31 years of damage such a system had wrought on communities where it operated. The weight of every complaint denied, every witness intimidated, and every corrupt arrangement confidently maintained by those with sufficient authority paying no attention. Since 7 o'clock on Tuesday, someone with sufficient authority was paying attention. He started the car. The federal court hearing in Atlanta began as scheduled at 9 in the morning. Maya sat next to Rachel at the plaintiff's table in the federal courtroom, which was larger and more formal than anything in Millbrook County, with high ceilings and the special institutional gravity that federal buildings possess when they function as they should. She wore a dark blazer over her crisp white shirt, her posture as upright and completely self-assured as it had been on the highway, in the waiting room, and in every situation before and after. Gloria was in the gallery. She had insisted on attending, and Rachel had arranged a seat for her in the front row where she could be seen before Maya turned completely around. Gloria was dressed with the care of someone who understood that appearance is a kind of argument in formal proceedings, and she sat with the calm, attentive posture of an educated, sitting with the calm, attentive posture of a woman who had trained others and knew exactly what a courtroom was for. The hearing concerned Rachel's motion, questioning the real basis of the amended charges. The county was represented by a young assistant from the district attorney's office, because District Attorney James Whitfield had taken leave that morning for reasons undisclosed by his office. Rachel noted this and added it to the file. The federal judge, a woman in her early 60s named Constance Beaumont, began the court hearing by addressing the county representative directly. "I have reviewed the evidence supporting the original charges and the amended charges," she said. "I want you to help me understand the basis for the amended charges." She began the hearing by addressing the district representative directly. "I have reviewed the evidence supporting the original charges and the amended charges," she said. "Considering the dashcam footage showing the events in an order inconsistent with the events described in the charging documents, I would like your help in understanding the basis for the amended charges." The junior assistant district attorney looked at the documents before him, at the statement of a person sent to represent a position he did not choose and did not have sufficient information to defend. He said a few things that did not add up to a coherent answer. Judge Beaumont listened patiently, with a little more attention to everything, allowing the process to be completed before responding. Then he said, "The amended charges are dismissed. Due to an active federal civil rights investigation, the original charges have been referred by the state attorney general's office for independent review. The county sheriff's department has been placed under federal compliance orders pending the outcome of this investigation." He looked at both tables. "Is there anything else before we adjourn?" Rachel said, "Your Honor, we request a compliance order prohibiting any contact between Millbrook County Sheriff's Department personnel and Maya Carter or Gloria Carter until the outcome of the investigation is announced." "Granted," said the judge. "Is there anything else?" There was nothing else. The judge banged the gavel. Maya glanced at the table for a moment. Then she looked at her mother sitting in the gallery. Gloria was looking at her with the expression Maya had learned to read over 38 years. It wasn't a smile, but it contained everything a smile contained, and much more. Maya nodded slightly to her. Gloria nodded back. Cross called Rachel at 10:47 a.m. as Rachel and Maya descended the courthouse steps into the bright October morning. "Briggs is in custody," Cross said. "Walsh and Porter will be picked up within 2 hours. Whitfield voluntarily surrendered at the federal building with his lawyer 40 minutes ago." Rachel stopped walking. "Whitfield turned himself in. He's cooperating," Cross said. "Fully. His lawyer negotiated the terms this morning. He's been carrying documents related to Briggs's operation for 2 years and didn't know what to do with them." A brief pause. "Now he does." Rachel looked at Maya. Maya had heard enough of Rachel's conversation and understood the situation. She looked down from the courthouse steps onto Atlanta Street. Morning traffic and an ordinary Tuesday stretched into Wednesday, now Thursday. The city went about its business in the bright October air. When Rachel hung up the phone, she asked, "Where is Briggs now?" "In federal custody," Rachel said. "The charges include federal civil rights violations, conspiracy, corruption, and using the sheriff's department infrastructure to run what Cross has defined as a criminal enterprise." Maya was silent for a moment. "What about Walsh and Porter?" "Same federal process," Rachel said. "Union lawyers made a statement this morning. Cross mentioned it to me. The statement acknowledges the behavior seen in the recordings took place and attempts to characterize it as an isolated incident. However, given the documented pattern and Whitfield's cooperation, that will be difficult to defend." Maya looked at her. "What about the department?" "The compliance order takes effect immediately," Rachel said. "The state attorney general is sending a team to Millbrook this afternoon to launch a full audit." The sheriff, who was not directly involved in last night's financial investigation, issued a statement calling for full cooperation with all federal and state investigations. She paused. "He also issued a statement this morning admitting that Tuesday's traffic stop was conducted without legal basis, and that the department is institutionally responsible for the conduct of its officers." Maya listened to all this and processed it with the systematic attention she applied to operational outcomes after an action was completed. She took into account what had happened, what had been resolved, and what remained. "My mother's record," she said. "Clean," said Rachel. "The wrongful arrest record has been deleted from the county system. Cross personally confirmed this morning. Gloria Carter has no record with the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department or any affiliated system." She paused for a moment. "And the civil case is still ongoing. Whatever the outcome of the criminal case, we will pursue the civil case to the end. Reforms, oversight structures, accountability mechanisms, none of this has anything to do with Briggs's defense or lack thereof." Maya nodded. She was looking out at the street, a typical October morning continuing in the clear light. "Good," she said. Gloria was waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Rachel had come down from the gallery while on the phone and stood with her hands clasped in front of her in the morning sun. She had the patient calm of a woman who decades ago had learned that worthwhile results are the ones you wait for properly. Maya descended the last few steps and stood before her. On that Atlanta morning, mother and daughter stood on the courthouse steps, October light falling on them without ceremony or drama, the city moving around them as usual, and neither of them said anything for a moment because neither needed to. Then Gloria placed her hand briefly on Maya's face, as she had done ever since she was old enough to remember, and said, "Good job." Maya covered her mother's hand with her own for a second. Then they went out into the street. 3 weeks later, Cross called Maya from Washington. It was another Tuesday morning, and Maya noted this without comment. She was drinking her coffee at the kitchen table, her laptop open to her service log, experiencing what she described as the unique quality of post-operative silence that comes after working under prolonged high pressure. Not emptiness, expansiveness. The mind, after the work is done. The task force will be officially announced next week, Cross said. The Department of Justice wants to use the Millbrook case as a basis for a national review of standards of force and the process for handling complaints. They've identified 47 departments across 19 states that show documented patterns with structural similarities to what we found in Millbrook. He paused. They want someone to lead the review. Maya remained silent. This position will come with real authority, Cross continued, not advisory, investigative authority with federal backing. The task will be to identify structural flaws, propose viable reforms, and establish oversight mechanisms that outlive any individual administration. He paused again. They want you. Maya looked out the kitchen window at the street below. The morning was clear and bright, an ordinary morning like any other, with no connection to the decisions made that morning. She thought of the highway in October, the 2 police cars in the rearview mirror, the noise of metal as Walsh opened the door, the 22 seconds passing by on the gravel roadside. Her mother had spent 17 hours in a holding cell on an arrest warrant that was never served. He thought about the 47 departments in 19 states. He thought about Patricia Denvers, who had been stopped on the same highway 18 months earlier, and whose complaint Briggs had dismissed within 3 days. He thought about August Coleman, who was trying to write a report and who had a deputy come to his house explaining the circumstances under which civilian intervention was appropriate. The cases were so deeply buried that they needed Whitfield's cooperation. He thought about what it meant to have the necessary training, resources, and institutional access to fight this, and what it meant to fully understand how many people faced the same systems without any of those advantages. When do we need to respond, he asked. The announcement will be made next week, said Cross, but if you need time, they'll wait. I don't need time, said Maya. This is a job made for me. The battlefield has changed, but the job is the same. Identify the threat, develop countermeasures, protect the people who need protecting. Cross was silent for a moment, then said, I was hoping you'd say that. I know, Maya said. She closed her laptop. She looked out the window at the October morning and thought about the Georgia highway, thought about 22 seconds, thought about everything that had happened that week, thought about 47 departments in 19 states, and thought about the specific palpable weight of the work that needed to be done but hadn't been done yet. Then she picked up the phone and called her mother. Gloria answered on the second ring. Tell me, she said, the way she always answered when she knew there was something to tell in Maya's voice. Maya told her, the task force, the authority, 47 departments, the authority. Gloria listened without interruption until the end, the way she listened to understand something fully before responding. When Maya finished, there was a brief silence. You already said yes, Gloria said. I already said yes, Maya confirmed. Gloria made the sound she made when she heard something that confirmed what she already knew, a small sound of satisfaction, appreciation, and the special pride of a mother who had spent years preparing her daughter for precisely this kind of moment, but didn't know how it would turn out. Then you'd better get to work, she said. There's a lot to do. Maya looked out the window at the bright October morning. Yes, there is, she said. She said goodbye to her mother, left her phone, and sat in the morning quiet of her kitchen, thinking about the 47 departments, 19 states, all the gravel roadside edges, the crowds along the roadside, and the records people made and shared, because they understood that the truth, properly documented and insistently presented, was more enduring than any order based on suppressing it. He thought about how Diane Okafor had published the images without a headline, because the images didn't need one. He thought about how Gerald Sims had stood closer than anyone else and held his phone steady throughout the entire incident. He thought about Patricia Denvers filing a complaint that disappeared within 3 days, James Okafor never fighting an illegitimate subpoena, and August Coleman trying to tell the truth to a system designed to prevent the truth from being told. The federal authorities' investigative powers and recommendations are not binding, aspirational rather than actionable, cosmetic rather than structural reforms, and considered what it would mean to eliminate the 47 versions of this system with the ability to implement such reforms. He thought about the 22 seconds on the Georgia highway and everything those 22 seconds set in motion, and he understood, as he had understood the moment he stood by the gravel, breathing steadily, hands at his sides, that what had happened to him that October Tuesday afternoon was not the end of something, it was the beginning. The October morning was clear and bright, filled with everything that needed to be done. Maya Carter had always been exactly that. She still was.